Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
You're up, baby.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Ivonne Schulte, and I am an alcoholic. Hi. It's so wonderful to be here. I really want to thank the committee, Scott, who's now in New York, who originally asked me to speak here, and Kevin, who's been such a gracious host, and Heather, and Ben, and everybody. I mean, what a weekend, huh? I've never been to a conference quite like this one. I have to say that it was so nice to just hear Ben up here. He was so touching, both last night and this morning. But to hear him offer the refunds, even though it would be, I'm sure, quite a hardship for the conference. I was trying to picture that because I've put together some things like this myself. But I was thinking, when we went out, some of us went out to a restaurant last night, and when Leilani and I were in the restroom, we overheard there was also a play here that was canceled last night, and the woman whose play it was she was very upset. I guess they had sold like 900 tickets or something, and I know that if I purchased a ticket to go to a play and they canceled the play, I would expect to receive a refund, or see it again. But both last night and this morning, I've overheard so many people say that they weren't going to ask for a refund. I thought, I'm so proud of being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're where our first tradition is alive and well, that our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. And I love that. That's what we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never, prior to coming, and if I say anything, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new this morning, if you're new, I hated AA when I got here, but I fell in love with it. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and where else do we get the family? Recently, I'm a member of the Pacific Group, and we do this thing there where you have a move, it's called, where people pitch in and help you move, and it's like a barn raising or something, really. And I just moved into a house, and my father was there, and he was just sitting in the corner giggling while he watched. People got my apartment into a truck and into the new house in an hour and 5 minutes. And my dad's sitting in the corner giggling, and I thought, it's just like that. The camaraderie we have here is just amazing. I love it. I love it. Anyhow, what a great weekend. I know that you all thought you were going to come here and hear a spiritual talk this morning, but really the committee decided that they wanted to test your spirituality. See, that's what it meant, spiritual breakfast. They wanted to see how gracious you would be to each other while you waited in line for your omelet. Such a great thing. But I know everybody was just wonderful about it. Anyhow, I'm going to tell you in a general way what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I was born in Los Angeles, actually. It doesn't matter, but I happened to be born in a maternity home for teenagers, but I was adopted into an incredible family when I was 24 days old. They're my family, my mother and my father. My mother passed away a few years ago, but I was raised by this great Roman Catholic family. I'm the only alcoholic there. I think that's the only reason I mention I'm adopted. It doesn't matter, but I'm certainly alien to my family. But I have an older sister and an older brother. My sister's 8 years older than me. She's 5'10.5" with blonde hair and green eyes. And when I was growing up, I wanted to be just like my sister. She was my idol. And my sister, she's one of those that our book describes as a certain type of hard drinker. And those people, our book says, that if they're given a good enough reason, they're able to stop drinking altogether or they moderate their drinking. So my sister, when she hit about 12, she went through this horrible party stage. I mean, my parents didn't know what to do. In fact, my parents ended up moving from Los Angeles to Fairfax, Virginia, thinking that if they could just move to somewhere a little quieter, that my sister would straighten out, you know. Fairfax is actually a little bit right out of D.C., but in any event, you know, my sister was this horrible, horrible party girl from about the time she was 12, and that's about the time that she started babysitting me, too. So I loved it. My sister would take me to these parties, and my sister always loved these really big guys with big muscles. I remember just being, when I was four when this started, and I remember the feeling, I just felt so safe around them. I loved these guys and my sister and the partying, and she would take me to these parties, and she would say to the guys, she would say, "My little sister can drink you all under the table." You know, I have no memory of how much I drank at that age, but I remember they would line up the beer cans and they would let me drink, and I remember the feeling of alcohol. Our book says, in the doctor's opinion, that men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. And you know, I have to say thank you, Leilana, also for coming with me, being my guest. I remember when Leilana was new, we were reading the book together, and we got to that part, and she asked me whether anyone drank for another reason. I thought, you're in the right place. But isn't that true? I can't, why would you drink but for the effect produced by alcohol? I guess that's why I'm in the right room, but I love the effect produced by alcohol, and if I could have drank, I love it. Even when I was 4, I do not remember my first drunk, but I remember the feeling of drinking and toddling around and spinning around and everyone thinking I was adorable, and I just remember how much fun it was, and I loved alcohol. Now, my sister went into one of those Scared Straight teenage programs when I was 9 years old, and that's when I stopped drinking temporarily. After that, I started drinking on my own when I was 11, which is, you know, it's funny because I have an 11-year-old now, and in some ways I think she's ready for a drink, but but what a horrible thought. She's a good girl, actually, but when one of my first times drinking on my own, I was 11 years old, and my girlfriend, Heather Smith, I stayed at her house for the weekend. Her parents were out of the country, and she was the youngest of many girls, and the older girls were all in high school. And Heather had a couple of girlfriends over. There were a lot of girls in this house of all different ages. And I'm sure that the 6th graders were doing 6th grade things, but I saw that the high school girls were drinking alcohol, and I wanted to get loaded. So I went up to the girls, and I said, you know, I could drink you all under the table. And they laughed, but they gave me a liter of 7 and 7. And I can't tell you what happened somewhere in that bottle. I understand the next day that I finished it, but I don't recall what happened to me somewhere, I don't know, a little bit into the bottle. The only thing I can tell you with certainty is that when I woke up in the morning, I was lying on the basement floor in my training bra. I found the rest of my clothes on the 3rd floor, and I had urinated in them sometime during the night. Now, that's how I drank when I was 11 years old. My drinking never got any better than that. I am not a social drinker. When I was growing up, though, I felt that there was something different about me from everybody else. By the time I got to the age of that age where I started to have to feel like I needed to fit in, and I never felt like I fit in anywhere. I felt like there was a glass wall between me and everybody else. I felt like my nose was always pressed up against that glass wall, and I just couldn't seem to get what it is that the other girls got. And I think now, and especially raising a daughter myself now, I think in looking back that anybody would have thought I fit in, but it doesn't matter what was reality. For me, my reality was my perception, and I never felt comfortable. I heard an expression when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was anxious apartness. And I identified that with that immediately. I realized that what I felt while I was growing up was anxious apartness. And I felt different, I felt apart, and I felt anxiety about it all the time. And I had 2 things that fixed that for me. And one was that I would switch groups of friends about every 6 months, because I had to switch groups of friends before whatever group of friends I was hanging out with realized that I didn't really fit in with them. And I always knew I had that sense of impending doom, and I knew that they were going to find out about me and see that I didn't really fit in, and so I would switch them. Or I would drink alcohol. Because when I drank alcohol, I didn't care. Who cares? I felt better than everyone when I drank alcohol. Alcohol changed everything for me, and I love that. And when I got to high school, though, I got involved with the drama department, imagine. And I thought for the first time, here's my answer. I realized instantly what my problem was. I realized that since I was an actress, I was an artist of sorts. And that meant I have an artistic mentality. And of course, I wouldn't fit in with people from Fairfax, Virginia. I knew that if I could move to New York City, I would find my people and I would feel comfortable and I would fit in. And so I made it my goal to move to New York City. And I got there at 17 years old. I got a scholarship to New York University to study at the Tisch School of the Arts. I went into a school called the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute. It was an amazing time. And, you know, it was like a dream come true for me. But the only thing that was even better than that was that in New York City, you didn't need ID to buy liquor. And the bars don't close till 4. And then there's after-hours clubs that are open till 6. And then if you know, there's those illegal after-hours clubs that open at 6. Oh, what an amazing time. I went out partying every single night. And after one semester, I had to drop out of NYU. When I was sober sometime, I went back to school and I got my transcripts from NYU and found out I had a 2.44 GPA. Now, I know that doesn't sound too horrible, but I have to tell you, I only had one academic course. I had Tai Chi Chuan, I had singing, voice. I couldn't do school. And my mother explained to me that if I was not in college, she was not going to send me money every month. I thought that was unfair because I tried to explain to her that since I was an artist, I didn't need school. But she kind of stuck to her guns on that one. And, I ended up, I couldn't keep a job is what happened. I couldn't, at one point I was the lunch bartender at this place called Cafe Carumba, and I couldn't get the bar open by noon. I overslept, and I would call in. It's so funny the way we think, like, when you're sober and you can look back at, day after day I would call up and have some kind of excuse as to why I couldn't be there. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. Like, every single day there's some valid reason I can't be at work on time. The way we live sometimes. But, I ended up getting tossed out of one place after another, and I ended up one night, the problem with that, too, is you have no references you can use. So there I was one night. I saw in the paper that they had this, there was an ad. They were looking for cocktail waitresses and dancers. I thought that was a little weird, the dancer bit, but I kind of brushed it aside, and I showed up in the neighborhood of about 42nd and 8th for this interview. I was like, I had just turned 18, and I had never been in Times Square before. It was something else in the late 80s. When I was growing up, I was somewhat of a promiscuous girl, but I always looked for something outside of myself in order to feel better. But I thought I was pretty worldly, but I was quite naive. I was raised in this Roman Catholic family. We went to church every week. I mean, I walked in this club, it was called the Star Club, which they didn't say in the ad, but there were like neon lights up, and I walk in, it's this dark, dirty shotgun bar, and it was about the most shocking thing I'd ever seen in my life. I had never been in a strip club, and but if I could picture one in my mind's eye, this is what it would look like. It was so dark and dirty, and the dancers there were all past their prime. I mean, and I was about to walk out, but Tony walked right up to me and offered me a job. And I said, just a cocktail waitress. And he said, not a problem. And that first night, I came into work the next night, and I thought a cocktail waitress was somebody who delivers drinks, Not at the Star Club. What I actually do is I sit down next to a guy at a bar, And the bartender will come over and say, would you like to buy the lady a drink? And he says, yes, that drink costs $20. I get an $8 commission off it. It buys them 8 minutes of conversation only. And then it's over, and then the bartender says, would you like to buy the lady another drink? And you keep on. And I just thought that was the most bizarre thing I'd ever heard. But that first night, this really young, rich, handsome Greek man walked in and sat down, and he bought me drinks the entire night. He never tried any. Oh, it was wonderful. He's a perfect gentleman in the Star Club. And at the end of the night, see, I had told myself when I took that job with Tony, I told myself I would work there for 2 weeks and 2 weeks only. And that was supposed to incentivize myself to go out during the day and look for a job, because at the end of 2 weeks I couldn't work there anymore. But that first night I walked out of there with $300. And I went, oh my God, $300? I'm going to be making like $80,000 a year. It's more than my parents ever made. I'm going to be rich. This is great. I love this place. And I went back the next night. There's no rich, Greek, young, handsome guy. And I walked out of there that night with like $60. And the night before, that would have been fine. But now I've already calculated how much money I'm going to make. If $60 isn't cutting it. So, Tony says you'd make a lot more money if you start dancing. And a fifth of vodka later, I became a dancer. And I went on. I discovered in New York, I was somewhat different then. I was 5'4", 112 pounds, long red hair, pale white skin. I was 18 years old, and I felt like the world was my oyster. And thank you so much, Heather. See, Ron? And I went on to find out that they have many different types of clubs. I went on to work at a place called Scores that opened up then, and I made so much money. I'll tell you what, the year I turned 19 years old, if I could have stayed there, if I could have continued drinking the way I did when I was 19 and lived the lifestyle I did, which was fun and exciting, and I felt powerful and everything was wonderful, I would have never come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober back east, and out there, I never hear it here, but out there I hear this crazy thing people say. They say, I hear it all the time too. People would say that how does it go? My best day drinking is not as good as my worst day sober. And I thought, oh, that's a crock. I love drinking alcohol. I would have never made it to Alcoholics Anonymous if I hadn't had fun drinking. I wouldn't have kept doing it. I love alcohol, and that year, that's my favorite year, I have to say. While I was there, though, New York City was a fun, exciting time. I still had the idea I was going to be an actress of sorts, and I wanted to live this bohemian lifestyle, and in keeping with that, I thought I should experiment with everything at least once in my life. I should try everything. I hitchhiked to Vermont for a rainbow gathering one summer. Now, I heard that they had free drugs there, so I had a little bit of an incentive, which was true, but I did it. I tried everything. And there was a woman I used to dance with. Her name was Katie, and Katie was an occasional social heroin user. And I thought that the only thing I'd ever known about heroin is when I was in middle school, I read this book called Dinky Hooker Shoot Smack. And but heroin was like this exciting, it was like this exciting thing, like, wow, that's really bad. You're really bad if you try heroin. And so I asked Katie one time if she would take me to try heroin. I'm sure I said it just like that, too. And she said yes, and I said, but you got to promise me ahead of time, we're only going to snort it. And she said, that's fine. And so we made a plan one night, and that's what we did. And I always have to stop here and say, I'm a garden variety alcoholic. I came up here, I identified myself as an alcoholic tonight. I'm not only saying that because I'm in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am a garden variety alcoholic. I am grateful that I was introduced to drugs at an early age because I ended up getting sober when I was 21 years old. I don't think that would have happened because I wouldn't have lost everything I lost had it not been for the drug usage. Now, when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was quite confused about what I was, and thankfully, somebody asked me to write out an inventory, and when I did that, I saw the way I drank when I was growing up. See, when I got to AA, I had stopped drinking long before, and when people asked me if I was an alcoholic, I would say, I don't even drink. And And thankfully, this woman had me write this inventory out because I saw the way that I drank when I was 11. I don't think that's the way 11-year-olds ordinarily drink. I saw, the way and I was asked to go to speaker meetings to see if I would identify. And I love speaker meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous because somebody could have an entirely different story than me, but I would identify with that feeling of anxious apartness that they talked about and how alcohol made that go away. And I'm so grateful for that. So I did use drugs, and there's a part of my story I can't tell you without telling you that I did that. But I am a garden variety alcoholic, and therefore I found my solution in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll tell you one more thing, too. When I got here to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had this idea that everyone here only drank alcohol for some reason. And I came in and I had this, I thought I was a badass is what I thought. I thought I was a little harder than everyone else. Yeah, I got sober at 21, but I thought it was harder. I didn't last very long out there, I guess, but I was harder. And I thought really that people who got here on alcohol alone that's kind of wimpy, really, I thought to myself. And so I wanted to let you know that I didn't get here on alcohol alone. I wanted everybody to know it, so I would say I'm Ivonne, I'm an alcoholic and a junkie. And it had to be junkie because I wanted you to know that I shot heroin. I'm a junkie. I'm a little, tougher than you guys. And where I got sober, that's an acceptable way to identify yourself, actually. But this one woman who asked me to write this inventory sat me down one day and she played a tape of a man named Johnny H. And this man said in his tape somewhere, what I heard him say was that as long as he was an alcoholic and something else, then he was different than you. And the program that worked for you may not work for him. And I had been here just long enough to find something attractive in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I did one of my first inventories ever, and I thought, but that's precisely why I have to identify myself as a junkie, because I want you all to know that I'm different than you. And then I thought, like Johnny said, maybe what works for you won't work for me. And it was that day that I became an alcoholic, and I don't believe I'm actually anything else. I'm an alcoholic. But there I was one night. I shot, we ended up shooting heroin that night. Katie told me if you were going to do it, you ought to do it right. That made sense to me. And especially I thought if I'm only going to do it once, So I started sticking needles in my arms that night, and I found myself physically addicted within a short period of time, and I decided if I could move back down to D.C., I could straighten out my life, and I could just drink again, and I would just drink. That's it, just drink. And so I moved back down to D.C. with my parents. I got a job bartending at a club in Adams Morgan. My life was getting back on track a little bit. I was getting loaded every night, but not shooting heroin. And then one night in a drunken stupor, it occurred to me that never was kind of a strong word. I mean, now I know how I got addicted last time. Why don't I just try it, say, once a month? And, I found myself, I was down there all the time. The thing about D.C., though, is what I would do. Now, mind you, I'm 19 at this time, still 5'4", 112, totally pale skin because I never see the light. And I would drive my parents' Nissan Sentra down into southeast D.C., and look for the group of people that looked like they did in New York, and I'd get out of the car and ask them for dope. Do you have any dope? I'm so grateful today. I can't believe nothing happened to me out there. Just crazy. But there I was. But actually what really happened is that most of the time I would get ripped off and I'd get a bag of laundry detergent. And so what happened is I would say, I have to go back tomorrow because I didn't really get it yesterday, so it doesn't count. And I was getting it about twice a week when I found out I was pregnant. And when I found out I was pregnant, it was the most exciting thing. I couldn't wait to have this baby. I knew it was going to be a baby girl, and by this time I knew that my problems had not been solved by moving to New York City, but I knew this baby was going to do it. I was going to have this baby, and she was going to love me with all her heart. I would love her with all my heart, and everything was going to just be perfect. And I pictured this, how we were going to live, and we'd have we would be styling and be in mother-daughter aerobics classes together, and we'd be best friends, and it was just going to be wonderful. So I showed up at the doctor, and I let her know that I'd been shooting heroin about twice a week, and I asked if the baby was going to be okay. And she explained to me that the greatest danger to a baby in the first trimester is spontaneous abortion, and that since my daughter was still alive, that she was probably going to be fine. And she then asked me if I needed some help, and I said, no, I quit 4 days ago. In fact, I had quit drinking, smoking cigarettes, and shooting heroin, and because I was going to have this baby. I wanted to be a mom like my mom was a mom. Not so square though, but my mom was a good mom, and I was just so excited about this, and I went for a few months, and I'll tell you what, I need Alcoholics Anonymous so desperately. I don't have any kind of power on my own. I know that on my own, I can maybe pull off 3 months. And what happens to me is that when everything in my life goes south, I have no way to handle the feelings that come with that. And I got demoted at the bar. They didn't want a pregnant woman behind the bar. And he left, and the new he totaled my first brand new car. And I mean, my whole life was out of control. And I remember I had, right when I found out I was pregnant, I had just found the connection in D.C. where I wasn't going to get ripped off anymore. And I moved into that neighborhood. And one night I got out, and I was at my wit's end, and I got out of a taxi cab at home, and I looked over and I saw them standing on the corner, and I thought, I'm just going to go over and say hello. And then that next voice said, that's not what you're doing. You know what you're doing. And then I thought, who cares, And I went that night and I started shooting heroin, and I couldn't stand the idea that I was doing that while I was pregnant. So I went on this full-out binge where I didn't want to get sober at all. I started smoking crack. I started drinking alcohol all the time, shooting cocaine, shooting heroin, and within, I don't know how long, a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months. I have no memory of how long it lasted, but for some reason I showed up at a prenatal appointment. So bizarre to me now, but there I showed up at that I guess that's God's will for me. I showed up at this prenatal appointment. My doctor took one look at my swollen hands and said she knew I was shooting heroin again, and that I had 3 choices. That I could try to quit on my own and my daughter would most likely die in utero, or I could continue living the way I was living, and when she was born they would drug test her and remove her from my custody, or I could go on methadone and they would allow me to keep the baby. So I went on methadone, and a few months later, or a few weeks, I don't know how long, my daughter was born, and I watched her detox in the neonatal intensive care unit for 16 days. And I sat with her almost the entire time, and it's funny, I had this self-centered victim mentality, and it was all separate from me. It wasn't my fault. If he hadn't have done that, if the job hadn't have done this, if this hadn't happened, I was so grateful when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and particularly reading that story in our book, Freedom from Bondage. When I discovered that when I'm responsible for my own life and the consequences of my own life, then I can have a good life. But when everything outside of me is responsible for my life, I'm never in control of whether my life is good or bad. I love that I have that freedom in Alcoholics Anonymous today. And I had social workers assigned to me, and they said, would you like to go in a program? And I said, no, if I ever think about drinking again, I'll picture my daughter shaking in that little tub, and I won't do it. And when my daughter was 16 days old, she was released on an apnea bradycardia monitor, and I was dragging her and that monitor in and out of crack houses 3 days later. And I spent the first 9 months of her life going in and out of crack houses, going back home to my mother, going back out, home. And I knew every time I disappeared, my mom knew what it was I was doing. And I started working for an escort service. And one day when I started shooting heroin again, the woman called me in, and she let me go. They have standards at those places, It seems they don't want escorts with track marks. And I went home. It's funny now, but that night I went home. After being on methadone, I needed $200 a day to get straight, and that was a lot of money for a girl like me to come up with. And I didn't know how I was going to make that kind of money. And I went back to this woman, Tawana, that I used to pay $20 a day to watch my baby. She was nodding off and sick, and we lived in this horrible, dilapidated row house in Northeast D.C. And I explained to her that I had just been let go from the escort service, and she said, it's not a problem. My brother Buttons is a pimp. We'll give him a call, and and you can go out and work for him. And that's what I did. She called Buttons, and he came and got me, and he took me out on the streets of D.C., and he explained to me what it was I was going to be doing. And, when I went off to NYU, it's not what I thought my life would be like when I was 20 years old. But there I was, and I loved it. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, somebody played a tape for me of Norm Alpe, and he would talk about seconds and inches, and that night was my seconds and inches of sorts. Because what happened is I was waiting in the first car. I got in the first car that pulled up, and me and my customer had an argument. See, he felt like he had picked me up on the streets. I was street price. I felt like I had just come from an escort service, so I was more valuable. And we couldn't come to an agreement about it. And unbeknownst to me, there was a police car behind us waiting. And I guess I got tired of waiting because they went ahead and put their lights on, but nothing was happening. So I, stepped out of the car and immediately said, "It's not what you think." Only guilty people say that. Isn't that true? It's not what you think. Well, how do you know what I think? And they let me go that night, but they said if they saw me out on the street again, they would arrest me on sight. And I was scared. And Button said he told me to go home back to Tawana, and he would send someone to take care of me. And I went back there, and he did not do that. And I was so sick that night. And I was so sick, and I knew at 7:15 in the morning my mom was about to leave for work. And I was too ashamed to speak with her because she knew every time I disappeared what I was doing and what I was doing with her granddaughter. But I couldn't think of anything else to do. And so I called her, and when she answered the phone, all I said was, "If you bring me $20, I'll let you have the baby." And she was more than happy to do that. And she found a family that could take care of my daughter. And she, asked me one more time if I would like to get some help. And this time I said yes, and I went into a detox, and I celebrated my 21st birthday in that detox. And then I went to a treatment facility for 30 days, but I met God. I met a guy. My counselor said I should not hook up with this guy. I was too new. I should go to meetings. In fact, they offered me this wonderful plan of living, and I said, "No, thank you very much. I've already learned my lesson. Brian and I are going to stay sober together." And that was not to be the case. And I ended up, Brian lived in Baltimore. I moved there, and I ended up working at the 408 Show Bar, where they have back rooms for the guys to take their girls. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I heard Chapter 3 read, and I heard the expression pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, the hair on my arm stood up, because I knew what pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization felt like. There was a day that I decided that I wanted to see my little girl again. They would not let me visit her because they thought I was going to kidnap her, which I would have. And so I didn't get to see her. And I would call my mom, and she would say things like, "Oh, your daughter took her first steps." And oh, that's funny. Ben, you started this. Where is he? There was a day I woke up and I thought, I will do anything to see my little girl again. And I thought back to, how could I live in this world and not live like this? And the only thing I could come up with on my own was to be on methadone. If I just go on methadone, I could be on methadone the rest of my life, and I could live like that. I could have my little girl back. And so I started calling methadone clinics, and everyone I called was either full or the line was disconnected when I called it. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Manning. And I showed up that night at the 408 Show Bar, and my mother called me while I was there. She actually tracked down the bar. She started calling, I guess, strip bars until she found the one I worked in, because I didn't tell her where I was working. But she said that there was a facility that took mothers and babies, and if I was willing to go now, I could have custody of my daughter back. And I went into detox like the next day or something. And I was in detox for a week. I don't count that as part of my sobriety. One, they gave me drugs. And two, I brought my own because they never give you enough at those places. So I don't know where in that week I ran out of heroin. But I know that the day I got out, February 10th, 1994, I know that I was physically sober that day. So I call that my sobriety date. And that's also the day I got custody of that little girl again, who I'll have to say, she was brought to me in this facility I was to live in for the next 14 months. She had no idea who I was. She had someone that she called Mama now, and she screamed and cried when I tried to hold her. And there was that part of me that thought, maybe you should just let her have the life she's living. And, for some reason, I was too selfish. And I'm so grateful that that's the way it happened, because we have an incredible life today. But anyways, I went through this facility, and I got out of this facility. They concentrated on the family, and I'm so grateful, because that's what enabled me to have my daughter back. But I got out at 14 months of sobriety, physically sober as I am today, but out of my mind crazy, because I didn't know Alcoholics Anonymous. And what's more is I was somewhat dangerous to myself, because I thought, I'm over a year sober, I know something. And thank goodness for me. I made decisions like this. When I was fired from that escort service, the madam, Kaylee, said to me, she said, I just want to let you know, Yvonne, that I'm sober in the program Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you ever want to get sober, I'd be happy to help you, and you could come back to work for me. So when I was 14 months sober, working at the Hex department store, making $6.50 an hour, I thought, why am I doing this? I could be making $200 an hour. And, it's one of those things, should I run this by my sponsor? No. I already know what she's going to say. But the thing is my sponsor doesn't understand. She's never had this experience. I know that she has certain morals and values, but I happen to think it's two consenting adults and it's none of the government's business. I can handle this on my own. So I went back to work for Kaylee. Actually, she was shut down. I went to work somewhere else. Once the idea popped in my head, I had to go with it. That's how my first few years of sobriety was like ready, fire, aim. I was quite dangerous to myself. Thankfully, what really happened though is I stumbled upon this home group, and this woman, I wouldn't get a sponsor because I had a list of things that my sponsor had to fulfill. Or qualifications she had to have, because I knew that if she didn't have these certain qualifications, she wouldn't be able to sponsor me. She wouldn't have the experience. And so what I had was, she had to be, it was going to be a woman, and she had to have been a stripper, she had to have been a prostitute, she had to have had a daughter and lost custody of that daughter and gotten it back. She had to have shot heroin and been physically addicted to heroin, and she had to have been on methadone. And I'm sure there were more, but surprise, surprise, I couldn't find anyone in my local AA area. And so I wouldn't ask anyone to sponsor me because I knew they wouldn't know how. And I was doing it quite effectively on my own anyway. But this one woman, I say woman, it's funny, I was 22 years old when I got out of this facility. This woman was 23. I guess I had like 14 months of sobriety, and she's 14 now, and I'm 10, so she must have been, I was a year and a half sober, a year sober, she was 4 years sober, and I thought she had so much time, like 4 years she was so sober, and she told me she was going to be my sponsor, and for some reason, she scared me, and I couldn't say no. And it's the funniest thing, because this is a woman who, she got sober at 18, like right out of high school. She had no like street life or anything really hard. And I look back now and I think, why did she scare me? Like, I don't know why I didn't just laugh at her, but it's one of those things where when you get to look back over time, it's God's will for me, I guess. And because she assigned herself to me, and she told me to take a series of actions. She told me I had to go to 7 meetings a week. I tried to explain to her that I had a little girl and I couldn't go to meetings every day. And she would say things like, I didn't ask your opinion. She gave me a whole bunch of stuff to do. I had to pick people up, and I had to get a commitment when I could. It's funny, where I got sober, you actually had to be elected into every single commitment. So like when a sweeper was needed, they would have a group conscience and nominate sweepers and then vote on it. Isn't that the funniest thing? So I actually didn't get a commitment for a long time. I'm sure it wasn't because of my attitude. But she would give me things to do, and she's the one that sat down and asked me to write that inventory where I started to identify as an alcoholic. And I started to go to conferences like this and to hear speakers talk about it, and I started to identify as an alcoholic. And, when I was about a couple of years sober, it was when I started seeing people in my group turn one that I had seen new. And these people seemed to have some kind of glow that I didn't have. They had some kind of happiness, and I lived in self-pity. I cried all the time. Anytime, if you called me up to the podium, I would start crying. And I would think, what is wrong with me? How come these people get this experience that I don't get? You know, it never crossed my mind it's because I'm working for an escort service secretly, or because I'm shoplifting now, or committing fraud over here, because those things escalate for a person like me. And, you know, I realized one day when I was at work that I was going to have to drink in order to continue to live the way I was living, because as much as I had it logically set in my head, I couldn't stand the way I felt about myself. I felt so much self-contempt and self-loathing, and I knew I couldn't live like that anymore without drinking to numb the way I felt about myself. And actually, I got a new sponsor at that time, and I told that sponsor everything that I was doing, and this sponsor started me on a new course of action. And I literally, I remember crying all the time and somebody telling me that I needed to do everything in AA, and I started to take it seriously. I thought, how can I say AA doesn't work if I don't do actually every single thing that our book outlines for us? When I retire at night, do I review my day? No, I don't. When I wake in the morning, do I ask God in my morning meditation for, whatever? No, I don't. I don't take these. And so I started to take the book literally. And I started to do, my sponsor at one point, I walked up to my sponsor one day and said, I did something self-will today. And my sponsor says, I want you to go home and read that book and do every single thing that book says. And I went home, and that's pretty much where it started. And I took every single action. It told me to get on my knees and pray. That's what I did. Actually, it doesn't say get on your knees, but whatever. I took every single action, and I thought, I'm gonna be the perfect AA member ever. And if that doesn't work, then I know that that's not the solution for me. And of course, we all laugh because you can't be the perfect AA. But what I did was I threw myself into Alcoholics Anonymous. I started working with people. I started getting to meetings early and staying late. I started taking the actions that are outlined in our book. I started doing everything. And I started to sponsor, I sponsor a young lady. My sobriety date, February 10th, 94, I said that. So I'm 10 years sober this year. I sponsor a young lady who's 8 years sober. She was 8 years sober in August. She's the first person I sponsored that stayed sober. Yeah. And I'll tell you, her name's Carolyn, and I'll just tell you that because of what happened next. What that segue was so great. I was doing everything in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did start to feel better. I stopped crying all the time. My life got so much better. The only thing that was missing is that I had this attitude about God, that for some reason I was mucked up in this whole Catholic Church thing, and I thought the Catholic Church was wrong, which I'm sure I would know better because I'm so spiritual. I had this idea, and I just couldn't get over this thing with God, and I was agnostic. I thought maybe there's a God, maybe not, but I could never feel God. I could never feel within myself that God exists. And I knew that you couldn't give that to me, and therefore I couldn't believe in God. And so I would never, ever in my entire sobriety get down on my knees and pray to God because I felt stupid praying to something that might not exist. And it's so funny now, when I look back at it now, I felt stupid praying on my knees in a room by myself. My arrogance is so overwhelming, really. I look back now, and I think what I lacked there was the humility. I had no humility. I didn't have the humility to get down on my knees and just take a simple action no matter what I thought about the results. It was just, I had this stubbornness about it that it talks about in our 12 and 12, actually. And there was this man in my group, and he used to say, he would talk about drinking. He would say, there will be times when you have the opportunity, and there will be times when you have the desire. But when opportunity and desire cross, you better have a God in your life. And every time he said that, the hair on my arm stood up. Because I was really involved in AA. I worked, I went to school, but my whole days were filled up. But I have no idea, really, if I was out there on my own, if I had to take a trip somewhere or something, would I really stay sober out there? I don't know. I had no relationship with a higher power, and as it turns out, I came out to California to go to an AA conference, and it's actually I went to the Wednesday night meeting. The Pacific group, like I said, is my home group. I was about 2.5 years sober. I went to the Wednesday night meeting, and I actually fell in love with that group and said, I'm going to move out here and become a member of this group, which is in fact what I did later. But coming back from that trip, I had a layover in Houston. I had this big book bag on my shoulder, and I was sitting down waiting for my plane to be called. And when they called the plane, I had my boarding pass in my hand, and I stood up, and the backpack fell off my shoulder, and I jerked my hand up, and I clipped off some of my cornea with my boarding pass. And I got in the airplane because I thought, well, I hit my eye and it stings, you know, usually stings for a couple minutes and then it goes away. So I hopped on that airplane, but for the whole ride home, it was horrible. I knew something bad had happened. So when I got to D.C., I went to the emergency room and, you know, it wasn't supposed to be a big deal. Corneal cells reproduce. They're the fastest reproducing cell in the body, so it was supposed to be better in a couple of days. But mine never got better. It got worse. And as it turns out, my eye got an infection that they couldn't determine what it was. And I was at George Washington University Hospital, and they ended up sending me to Johns Hopkins, which was like an hour and 15 minutes away, but it's one of the premier eye clinics in the world, and they could do nothing for me, and I developed an ulcer in my eye, and I had necrotizing bacteria, and literally it felt like somebody was sticking a hot poker in my eye all the time. And there was a point at which I had to put eye drops in my eye every half an hour, 24 hours a day for more than a month. And I never had to set an alarm clock to wake me up every half an hour because I could not sleep 30 minutes at a clip because I was in the most agonizing, unbearable pain. And I told you about Carolyn because I actually started sponsoring Carolyn the week before my eye accident. And I'm so grateful to her because there were times, it's funny, she told me later that a lot of people said, because in fact I was out of my mind crazy. I was out of my mind. People said, your sponsor's out of her mind. You need to get yourself another sponsor. And she said she would have if they hadn't have said that. There were nights when the only reason I didn't drink was because I couldn't picture taking a newcomer chip in front of my new baby, Carolyn. One night I went to the eye doctor, and I saw the eye doctor 7 days a week. I had to go in on Sundays. On Sundays, I saw the on-call surgeon who was making rounds of the surgeries. And this one Saturday night, I went in to the eye doctor, and he said, Ivonne, there's nothing more we can do for you. 50-50, you're going to lose your eye altogether in the next week. And I was so devastated that night. I thought, you know, I had this idea, like, here I am, I'm sober, I'm doing the right thing now. My life is filled with action. I'm helping people. I'm going to all the meetings. I quit doing all the wrong stuff. See, aren't I supposed to, like, my life is supposed to be different now because I've changed. And, like, I'm supposed to get some reward for being sober as if sobriety isn't my reward. I had this idea, and I thought that night when my mom was actually driving me to my home group meeting, and I thought, you know what, I can't stand this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. And I thought, what I decided was the next day I was going to go shoot a bag of heroin. Not because I didn't want to be sober, but because I needed something to take the edge off of. I couldn't imagine living another day in the kind of pain that I was in. And so I went to my home group meeting that night, and this is why I have a home group. That woman who had actually been my first sponsor, I guess realized that I was a little crazier that night than usual. I can't imagine, because I was literally out of my mind. I mean, it was amazing to look at me those days, but she sat me down and gave me unsolicited advice. She told me I had to go home that night and pray for the removal of the obsession I had with my eye. And I have to tell you that nothing ever made me angrier in Alcoholics Anonymous than when she said that to me. And what I thought was, I'm seeing doctors at Johns Hopkins University. They don't have a solution for me. You can't seem to get out of community college, but you think you do? I didn't say it. I didn't say it, but that's what I thought. And so I went home that night, and I lay in bed for 2 hours trying to think of ways I could kill her and get away with it. I mean, I was seething with, you know when you're so resentful and you can't sleep? Oh, my whole body was consumed with hate for this woman. It was all directed right at her. And within a couple of hours, that little voice in my head just kept saying, why don't you just take the action? No, that's ridiculous. You don't pray for removal of obsession. Ugh. And that voice kept going, though, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous. And I ended up getting on my knees and saying something. I have no idea what I said, but the feeling was, please remove the obsession I have with my eye, whatever. And it was the first time I had been on my knees to pray since I was sober, since I had gotten sober. And I crawled back up in the bed and I fell asleep. And that night I didn't wake up for 6 hours. And when I woke up, it was the next morning, and most of the pain was gone. And that day, the on-call surgeon I saw was the same doctor who had seen me the night before, and he had no medical explanation for the healing that had occurred in my eye overnight. In fact, they called in a corneal photographer the next day to take pictures because they couldn't believe it. And I'll tell you, that day I got my greatest gift in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was a relationship with God. I realized that day that I had been wrong, that I could feel God. I felt God from that day on. Sometimes I have to work it. Sometimes I do. It's important that I continue my side of the relationship with God. But from that day, I developed a relationship with God. But I have to tell you that I also learned my greatest lesson that day. And that was this, that I had decided that what had happened to me was the worst thing that could ever happen. Nobody should ever have to experience something like this. It just wasn't fair. It's the worst thing that could happen. And from what I judged to be the worst thing in my life, I got my greatest gift, a relationship with God. So who am I to judge what's right or wrong in my life, or what's good and bad? And I'll tell you, that has made my life so much easier from that time on. I do experience pain. I do experience pain. I was engaged to be married at one point until I found out that he was simultaneously engaged to another woman. Only in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And I felt pain, but I'll tell you what, when I lay on that bed that day, when I found out, I thought to myself, the last time you thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen to you, you got your greatest gift. And that helped me put one foot in front of the other, and I could go to my meetings. I knew at the other end it was going to be okay, and that it was going to be the best thing that happened for me. And that's been my experience. You know, this year has been a year of, I can't say, I've had somewhat of a hard year, but it's so funny because today my life is filled with so much good, and then there's always things that aren't altogether right. I had another corneal transplant last October to try to get the vision back because I was left blind by the corneal scarring. And so last October I had this corneal transplant, and it was my second one because the first one rejected. And my doctor said I needed to do this 2-month course of immunosuppressants, which included a high dose of steroids. And it didn't work out exactly the way we were hoping. And as it turns out, a year later, I'm almost off that high dose of steroids. And in that time, I put on 80 pounds. And I don't feel comfortable with that. In fact, when I started to put on the weight, I thought, I can't go to meetings until this is over. And thank God, because I would have died in my own home, I'm sure. But I know what to do. I pick up and I go to the meetings, and it'll be okay again someday. I'll be off the steroids probably in about 6 to 8 weeks. And I have such a great life today. When I was a year sober, when I left that treatment facility, I went back to community college, like this one. I thought, I lived in the projects at the time with my little girl, and I thought, I didn't know what I could do. My first idea was to be a drug treatment counselor until my sponsor pointed out that something like professionalism is the occupation of counseling alcoholics for fee or for hire, and she told me I couldn't get paid to do what I had received for free. And then that's how it was for me anyway. And really, the truth was, I didn't really want to be a drug treatment counselor. I just thought it would be the only thing I'd be good at. I couldn't imagine being good at anything. I was a horrible student when I was growing up. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the drinking. So I went back to community college, and I thought if I just get a 2-year degree, maybe I could support my daughter. And I went and I learned to apply what I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous to school, which was to go early, stay late, to do what I said I'm going to do when I say I'm going to do it. I did all my homework. I sat up front. I asked questions. And I found that I got straight A's. I couldn't believe it. Every single report card, it'd be straight A's again, straight A's, straight A's. And I finally saw this school counselor when I was almost done with my 2 years. And he was like, you could go to college, And I said, yeah, I guess I could maybe go to the state school. And he said, no, I think you could go about anywhere you'd like. And I applied, and I got a scholarship, an academic scholarship to George Washington University. And I went there, and I finished my 2 years, and I graduated 2 years later, first in my field. And my mom got to sit on the White House lawn and watch me graduate first in my field, and she had my daughter on her lap. And I'll tell you, I'm so grateful for that. My mom was diagnosed with cancer a few months later, and thankfully, when she passed away, I was straight with her. And most importantly, she knew that she didn't have to worry about her granddaughter with me any longer. And I had one untied bit of business with her. I still owed her a lot of money, and thank God for sponsors, because my sponsor said, obviously you won't pay her back before she passes away. Go ask her what she wants you to do with the money. And I'm so grateful, because I hear horrible stories where people don't get to finish that, and I got to finish that. And my mother was alive long enough to see me go to law school. I applied and got into a very conservative law school in Northern Virginia, and I got in there my first day of class with all these, coats and ties, and I thought, I bet I'm the only junkie hooker here. I'm quite sure I'm right about that, too. And I'll tell you, it was I needed to stay with my mom while she was dying, and so I stayed and finished law school there. But it was my dream, and I moved out to California the day after I graduated from law school to be a member of the Pacific Group, where I had had a sponsor for a number of years by that point. And, I have an amazing life. After a couple of rough starts, I passed the bar last year. Actually, it's almost, I passed the bar last year, and and I have this, I'm active in my group. I believe in, I love that, the men's meeting, Unity Service Recovery, USR, because I'm a firm believer that we can't have lopsided triangles. That I need unity, I need my home group, I need to be of service, and I need recovery, which I believe is outlined in our book. And that's how I participate in my group. I'm an active member of my group, and I have this amazing 11-year-old girl today. I have a job I've been at for 2 years, and they depend on me, and they think I'm a good employee. And everything I have today is a direct result of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I just have to remember, it's funny, these bumps like what happened last night. I mean, I can't wait to find out what the reason for that was. I love seeing that 5 years later and looking back and going, oh, yeah. Everything in my life is amazing, and I have you to thank. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.